Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to session number 305 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. We are returning to the supplement, the Psychotherapy Pamphlet, right? Psychotherapy, Purpose, Process, and Practice. Right, a supplement to the text. Right, it came after the text was published, I believe. So, and this one is focused on psychotherapy. Right. And as he said in the beginning of the pamphlet, all therapy is psychotherapy because it's in the mind, actually. So let us begin. We are in chapter 2, which is the process of psychotherapy, and we are focusing today on section 6. All right, Roman numeral 6, the definition of healing. Okay. The process of psychotherapy, then, can be defined simply as forgiveness, for no healing can be anything else. The unforgiving are sick, believing they are unforgiven. The hanging on to guilt, its hugging close and sheltering, its loving protection and alert defense, all this is but the grim refusal to forgive. God may not enter here, the sick repeat over and over again, while they mourn their loss and yet rejoice in it. Healing occurs as a patient begins to hear the dirge he sings and questions its validity. Until he hears it, he cannot understand that it is he who sings it to himself. To hear it is the first step in recovery. To question it must then become his choice. All right. Jesus is talking about 2 steps in the process of forgiveness. There's 3 steps, but the 3rd step is up to the Holy Spirit to correct our perception. All right. So he says the process then can be defined simply as forgiveness. So this, no matter what it seems like, no matter what transposes between patient and therapist, client and therapist, however you want to, whatever word you choose, right? It's the idea of forgiveness, right? It's the dropping of all the projections. Right? The therapist drops his projections or her projections. Right? All the judgments being made about the client, the patient. All right? So he says the unforgiving are sick, right? Believing they are unforgiven. So the sick, all right, us, because we believe we're guilty. We believe we separated, right? And therefore we're unforgiving because I'm still harboring that guilt, that belief in guilt. And when I do that, my ego thought system constantly tells me to get rid of that feeling, is to project it onto an other, right? That's why we have so many others in the universe here. Right? So I believe I'm hopeless, I'm lacking something, whatever it is you think about yourself, which is a false image of yourself. Whatever shortcomings you think exist. All right? And we project that. We have to get rid of that feeling, you know. The hanging on to guilt, right? It's hugging close and sheltering. It's lovely protection and alert defense. All this is but the grim refusal to forgive. Right? It's my resistance to letting go of the guilt. It's my resistance to letting go of guilt. Right? I hug it close. Right? I protect it. All right? And my mind says, God may not enter here. Because if God enters, if the awareness of oneness enters, the ego disappears. The guilt disappears because it's actually a fallacy. It's an illusion. All right? So in order to maintain self, the image of self that I have, built up, right? I say, no, God can't come in here. All right? This is my world. So that's the grim refusal to forgive. So God may not enter here. The sick repeat over and over, while they mourn their loss and yet rejoice in it. Right? Which is a crazy dichotomy there. All right? I'm deep down inside, I mourn the loss of everything. I turned my back on the totality of oneness, however you want to verbalize it. I turned my back on God, turned my back on heaven. I bit the apple, whatever. However you want to say that. All right? We repeat it over and over again, and I'm sad about it on one level. I mourn the loss. And yet I rejoice in it, because if I'm guilty, that means I did it. I separated from heaven, separated from the oneness. I am an individual. I, as Kevin the individual, exist. Okay? So I rejoice over that victory. Right? Healing occurs as a patient begins to hear the dirge he sings to himself. Or he hears the dirge he sings and questions its validity. Until he hears it, he cannot understand that it is he who sings it to himself. To hear it is the first step in recovery. To question it must then become his choice. Okay. That's 2 steps in the process of forgiveness. I have to hear, what is it that I'm saying? It's like I used that example of going to my counselor, my friend Emily, 30 years ago or so. And telling her how terrible I felt. I was so angry. And it was just driving over, say 10 miles from my house to hers. And just angry at everything and everyone on the road. And I said to Emily, it can't be everybody. In that moment, right? I was listening to the dirge, the funeral song that I was singing to myself. All right? Everyone is pissing me off. There's something wrong with everybody. What's going on with this world? I'm so angry. Right? I'm hearing the song, what I'm telling myself. Right? And then the second step is I'm willing to question its validity. And that came out as, Emily, help me. It can't be everybody. It just can't be everybody. Okay? And it's different in everybody's life. You start to hear the story that you tell yourself, right? About your life, your past, your family of origin, as they say, and whatever it is, all about the people at work or whatever it is. We start to hear that I'm constantly telling myself this story about myself or about what's happening to me and who did it, and and then at one point I question it, and like Helen and Bill Thetford on their way to the meeting at Columbia Presbyterian or Columbia University, and they said there had to be a better way. There must be a better way to get along, right? Because everybody was bickering, and those two were bickering all the time, and they were bickering within the department, right? Within the psychology department, there was, all kinds of backbiting and gossiping and little sarcastic remarks and whatnot. And he just said, I can't take it. I hate it. There has to be a better way. So he started to question, right, the validity of what he was thinking, right, about all his peers and whatnot, and about Helen. He said, there has to be a better way. And Helen was sitting with him, and she immediately agreed. She said, yes, there has to be, and I will help you find it. Crack in the cosmic egg, the beginning of the Course in Miracles. The willingness, right? So to hear it, to hear the song that you're singing to yourself is the first step. Like as they say in the 12-step program, the first step is to realize, do you have a problem? Right? And with the Course, they say now that the second step becomes your choice. Do you want to do something about the problem? Right? And that's what we call in the Course the little willingness. Right? The little willingness to have my perception corrected. All right? And that's when healing occurs, when the patient begins to hear the dirge he sings and questions its validity. Until he hears it, he cannot understand that it is he who sings it to himself. To hear it is the first step in recovery. To question it must then become his choice. Right? Paragraph 2. There is a tendency, and it is very strong, to hear the song of death only an instant and then dismiss it uncorrected. These fleeting awarenesses represent the many opportunities given us, literally, to change our tune. Right. The sound of healing can be heard instead. But first, the willingness to question the truth of the song of condemnation, must arise. The strange distortions woven inextricably into the self-concept itself but a pseudo-creation, make this ugly sound seem truly beautiful. The rhythm of the universe, the herald angel's song, all these and more are heard instead of loud, discordant shrieks. Okay. So this is there's a tendency at times, all right, to hear that self-condemnation. There's a tendency at times to be aware of it, however briefly, right? He says, so there's a tendency, and it is very strong, to hear this song of death only an instant, right? Only an instant, and then dismiss it uncorrected, right? To like dissociate from it, to pass it off as something else, to cover it over. All right, but these fleeting awarenesses, all right, they represent many opportunities that are given to us to change our tune. All right, we have many opportunities in our lifetime to question the story we're telling ourselves, right? The image we're projecting here. Right? We have many opportunities to question it. Right? And let the sound of healing be heard instead. Right? But first, the willingness to question the truth of this song of condemnation must arise. So we have to be willing to say, what could this be? Could it really be? You know, is this the truth? I'm just reminded of my own path away from the restrictions of guilt of the Catholic Church that I was brought up in. Right? And I started asking myself, is this the truth? Who made this up? You know, is this really the rule? Is this really what happens? You know, you start to question. And there's a willingness to let the answer arise. That's the little willingness. But first, the willingness to question the truth of the song of condemnation must arise. All right? The strange distortions woven inextricably into the self-concept itself, into the self-concept. I don't know why I'm having a problem reading this sentence here. The strange distortions woven inextricably into the self-concept itself, but a pseudo-creation, make this ugly sound seem beautiful. All right? So there's strange distortions in what our senses report to us. All right? Oh, what a beautiful sunset. What a beautiful world. You know, look at the beautiful day God has provided for us. You know, the harmony of the spheres, as Shakespeare would say. Right. So those are the strange distortions woven inextricably into the self-concept. Right. All these and more are heard instead of the loud, discordant shrieks. In other words, we rapidly cover it over. Right? You might get a thought, especially these days with the amount of information available, the constant bombardment of information, true or false, but it's coming toward us. You might all of a sudden have this thought that says, what a horrible place. What a horrible place. You know, look what people do to one another. How could a person do that to another human being? And look at what these people are suffering. And all of a sudden, you get that thought, and then we cover it over. Right? We cover it over. We start to replace it with nice thoughts. You know? And you might get that thought just for a fleeting moment. All right? And that's part of the dirge, the funeral song that I sing to myself. I'm in a horrible place. Right? How did that happen? Right? So, and all these things are covered over by, you know, go somewhere nice and see a movie or something. You know, go listen to a nice song, and a song that you like on whatever device you listen to. You know, and let that thought go, let it pass unresolved, without investigation or anything. Right? And all these and more are heard instead of the loud, discordant shrieks. Like, what am I doing here? How did I get here? Right? Like the talking heads. This is not my house. This is not my beautiful wife. How did I get here? Then he goes, oh my God, what have I done? But that's the song that we cover up. It's like, oh my God, what have I done? And quickly, that gets covered over with something. So that's the loud, discordant shriek. Right. Then he tells us in paragraph 3, the ear translates. The ear translates. It doesn't hear. The eye reproduces. It doesn't see. Their task is to make agreeable whatever is called on, however disagreeable it may be. They answer the decisions of the mind, reproducing its desires and translating them into acceptable and pleasant forms. Right? Sometimes the thought behind the form breaks through, but only very briefly, and the mind grows fearful and begins to doubt its sanity. Yet it will not permit its slaves to change the forms they look upon, the sounds they hear. These are its remedies, its safeguards from insanity. Alrighty then. So the body does what the mind tells it to do. Right? And the task is to make agreeable whatever is called on, however disagreeable it may be. So the body is called upon to rationalize this whole world, right? To normalize it. Or in today's common usage, they call it sane washing. To sane wash the universe. Make it all make sense. Make it make sense. So the mind, in the ego thought system, that part of the mind enlists the slaves of the senses and the body, okay, to make agreeable whatever is called upon, however disagreeable it may be. All right. In other words, you accept what it is, you rationalize it, you say whatever it is, just to cover up the unpleasantness, to say the least. The body does what the mind wants. All right? And the key to that is to learn which guide you're listening to. Right? If I look around me, no matter where I am, and I see all I see is the horrors that exist. All right? I'm listening to my ego thought system. And if I'm looking around, and it's not that the people or the actions have changed, it's just that all of a sudden I'm aware of the connection, the connectivity of people. I'm aware of the oneness. Things are reflecting the oneness back to me. Then I know I'm listening to the Holy Spirit. I'm listening to Jesus as my guide. Whatever symbol you want to use there. All right. And it's not that I don't act within the world if I'm called upon to do so. I can do that, but I'm coming from a space of love because I've looked around and I realized, oh wait, I don't want to look through the eyes of the ego. I'd rather look through the eyes of peace. All right. I'd rather look at things through Jesus' eyes, right? Because the body, the senses, they answer the decisions of the mind. The decision of the mind. Do I want to see through the eyes of separation, separate interests, chaos, right? Or do I want to make the decision to come back to the awareness of oneness and see through that filter? So then the body answers that decision also. Right? Sometimes the thought behind the form breaks through, right? But only briefly. So sometimes the guilt breaks through, but only briefly. The mind grows fearful and begins to doubt its sanity. Right? Yet it will not permit its slaves to change the form they look upon and the sounds they hear. Right? So sometimes that thought of guilt, that self-hatred, right, breaks through. Right? And he says, but only briefly. All right? Yet it will not, the mind will not, and the mind grows fearful and begins to doubt its sanity. All right? So if a thought of self-hatred, which is the product of guilt, if that breaks through, all of a sudden, if I keep dwelling on that, I am going to doubt myself. I'm going to doubt my own worth. I'm going to have a terrible idea of myself. I'm going to start doubting my sanity. What am I doing? What is it for? You know? And it's never going to get better. You know, you start to think you're going out of your mind, right? So the mind grows fearful and begins to doubt its sanity. Right? Yet it will not permit its slaves, which is the body and the senses, so the mind still won't permit its slaves to change the forms they look upon or the sounds they hear. These are the remedies and its safeguards from insanity. All right. So just the ego mind fights against questioning. Is this real? What is happening? You know, there must be a better way. You know, or going to the right mind and asking, help me to see correctly. Right? The ego mind fights against that. Right? So he says these are the remedies and the safeguards from insanity. And it means it won't allow you to question. Just won't allow you to question the guilt. Paragraph 4, these testimonies which the senses bring have but one purpose, right? To justify attack and to keep unforgiveness unrecognized for what it is. Seen undisguised, it is intolerable. Without protection, it could not endure. Here is all sickness cherished, but without the recognition that this is so. For when an unforgiveness is not recognized, the form it takes seems to be something else. And now it is the something else that seems to terrify. But it is not the something else that can be healed. It is not sick, and it needs no remedy. To concentrate your healing efforts here is but futility. Who can cure what cannot be sick and make it well? So in all those words, what he's telling you is the guilt is in the mind. He says you could try all you want to have remedies and cure your body, and take pills for this and that. All right? He says that's the something else. All right? The body is the something else. Right? So all these things that our senses report to us, to go back to the beginning of the paragraph, right? They have a purpose. The world has a purpose. Right? And the purpose of the world is to justify the attack and thus keep guilt unrecognized for what it is. Right? So the purpose of the world, actually, is to justify my projections of guilt onto it. And to prove, and if I prove that you're guilty, it's just proving that I'm guilty. I'm trying to get rid of it, but it proves that I'm guilty. So that proves that I'm separate, you're separate, everybody's separate. Right? And that's the purpose of the world, is to reinforce that idea of separation. Okay? To justify attack and keep unforgiveness, which is guilt, keep guilt unrecognized for what it is. Right? Seen undisguised, it is intolerable. Right? If my guilt was not disguised, I couldn't tolerate it. So what I do is I repress it. I push it down. And as Freud says, whatever is repressed has to be projected. So I repress the guilt and I project it, thinking I'll be rid of it that way. Right? Because if my guilt is undisguised, it's intolerable. And it does. It rises up a little bit subconsciously, as they would say. All right? And I nip it in the bud, repress it, project it. And without protection, without this protection of repression, right, it could not endure. Right? So if I look at my thoughts, right, if I look at my thoughts with the idea of allowing the truth in, they would dissolve. Without protection, it could not endure. Here is all sickness cherished. But without the recognition that we're cherishing it. All right? I cherish my guilt because my guilt says I separated, I did it. I have a victory over God. All right? So I don't recognize it as that. I don't realize I'm cherishing it. But he says, but when an unforgiveness is not recognized, so when guilt is not recognized for what it is, all right, the form it takes seems to be something else. All right? So what has happened is the guilt has taken form, let's put it that way. And that's the body. And all the other bodies and all the other things around us. All right? We have projected out of the one mind, and we have created all these something else. We've made something else, and it's not guilt, it's something else. So it's not guilt, it's my body, right? And other bodies that seem to terrify me, right? But he says, but it's not the something else that can be healed. So it's not the body that can be healed. It's not the cruelty of every other body, right? It's not that can be healed, right? It's not sick. It can't be sick. It's nothing. It's an illusion. So there is no remedy. Right? The remedy is in the mind. So to concentrate your healing efforts here on the body, on the world, is futility. Who can cure what cannot be sick and make it well? Right? In other words, it's a very roundabout way of saying the guilt is in the mind. The form is not what we're trying to correct here. Right? Because something else is going to pop up. Something else will occur or pop up somewhere. As we keep saying, it's one thing after another. And there's periods in your life when it seems, you're aware of it, it's one thing after another. Oh my God. I need a rest. I need a vacation. I need a drink. I don't need a drink, but some people refer, they go to that. Whatever, drink, drug, sex, work, driving fast, taking vacations, collecting things, whatever. These are the little remedies to the something else's that always happens. Not realizing that the something else is the result of a belief that I have. It's a belief that I'm guilty. And that's a thought that's in my mind. 5, sickness takes many forms, and so does unforgiveness. The forms of one but reproduce the forms of the other, for they are the same illusion. So closely is one translated into the other that a careful study of the form of sickness, that a form a sickness takes, will point quite clearly to the form of the unforgiveness that it represents. Yet seeing this will not affect a cure. That is achieved only by one recognition, that only forgiveness heals an unforgiveness, and only an unforgiveness can possibly give rise to sickness of any kind. So he says, look, sickness takes many forms, just the way that guilt does. Right? And he says these forms are the forms of one, but reproduce the forms of the other. But they're the same illusion. So whatever form of guilt is going to produce some form, something else. All right? But they're the same because they're illusions. So closely is one translated into the other. So, and there are people that do this. All right? They'll figure out why did you burn your finger as you were cooking the rice? Right? That's a terrible burn. Then they'll say, well, which finger did you burn? And they'll assign a meaning to each finger. Right? It could be family or sex and personal relationships, right? Whatever. And if suppose you sprain your ankle, you're about to embark on something new, a new job or a new relationship or whatever, and all of a sudden you sprain your ankle. There's people that will say, oh, because you just look at the fact that you're afraid to take the next step and all that. Right? And it goes on and on. Sometimes gastric problems are, a red flag to some therapists. Well, everything is a red flag, okay? Everything's a red flag. That this. And they think that there's something that can be done about that. All right? So closely as one translated into the other, that a careful study of the form of the sickness, all right, my sprained ankle, that the form a sickness takes will point quite clearly to the form of unforgiveness that it represents. All right, my self-image is poor. I'm afraid to take the next step. All right, that's the form of the guilt. All right. He says, yeah, but even that, he goes, yet seeing this doesn't affect the cure. All right, so you know why you sprained your ankle. Okay. That doesn't affect the cure. The cure is achieved by only one recognition, that only forgiveness heals an unforgiveness. Only forgiveness heals the guilt. And only an unforgiveness can possibly give rise to sickness of any kind. So only guilt gives rise to sickness of whatever kind of sickness it is. All right. So then he goes on to say, this realization is the final goal of psychotherapy. All right. How is it reached? All right. The therapist sees in the patient all that he has not forgiven in himself, and is thus given another chance to look at it, open it to reevaluation, and forgive it. Right? When this occurs, he sees his sins are gone into a past that is no longer there. Until he does this, he must think of evil as besetting him here and now. The patient is his screen for the projection of his sins, enabling him to let them go. Let him retain one spot of sin in what he looks upon, and his release is partial and will not be sure. So, all right. And at the end of the last paragraph, he says, so the cure is achieved only by the recognition that only forgiveness heals guilt. Right? And only guilt gives rise to sickness. So you realize that. So he says this realization is the goal of therapy, the final goal. And how is it reached? In other words, the therapist realizes that the person sitting with them, the person who has come for help, it's a screen on which they project all their judgments, all their unforgivenesses, all their guilt. All right? Until I start that process of realizing, oh, I don't want to project that judgment. I don't want to project that judgment. I bring it to my right mind, whatever you want to call it. I bring it to that place of peace in my mind. All right? Call it your higher power. Call it Jesus, call it Buddha, call it, as Dr. Wapnick would say, call it Kam Yankel, who was the bagel salesman in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, when he was a kid. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's that place that remembers innocence. And we go there and we make the report, so to speak. I'm willing to see correctly. I'm willing to take back my judgment of this person and allow the truth about this person to arise in my mind. The patient is his screen, right? He sees the patient is the screen for the therapist, and he or she can see what the projections are, which enables them to let them go. And we let them go by asking, help me to see correctly. That's the process in the Course. That's the process of forgiveness. You realize you're projecting. You say, no, I don't want to do that. You take them back, so to speak, and you turn them over to that place in your mind that remembers innocence, that actually remembers who you really are, that remembers that you're not guilty. All right? So there's no need to project guilt onto the other. All right? So that's an opportunity to let the guilt go. Okay? And once that happens with the therapist, all right, as he says in the next paragraph, no one is healed alone, because it's not about bodies. It's not about separate minds. All right? The entire sonship, so to speak, is one mind. So when my mind is healed, the whole sonship gets the benefit. No one is healed alone. That's why in the text Jesus says, you were with me when I arose. Right? So when I came into the realization of who I really am, you were with me. Because it happens in the mind, and the mind is one. Right? As they say, the second coming is just the realization of your connection to the oneness, your connection to God, so to speak. Right? No one is healed alone. This is the joyous song salvation sings to all who hear its voice. This statement cannot be too often remembered by all who see themselves as therapists. Right? No one is healed alone. Their patients can but be seen as the bringers of forgiveness. For it is they who come to demonstrate their sinlessness to the eyes that still believe that sin is there to look upon. Yet will the proof of sinlessness seen in the patient and accepted in the therapist offer the mind of both a covenant in which they meet and join and are as one. Okay? That's the goal of the psychotherapy, is to realize that this person that has come to me and asked me for help, right, is, as they say, he's my savior. Right? Because he's going to help me to see which guide I'm listening to. And he's going to help me, because I see that, I can make a choice. And I can escape from the world of guilt. I can escape from that thought. All right? And as I keep saying all throughout these videos here, it's a process. It is a process. All right? But there comes a time when there is that grand advance. All right? That grand awareness. The shift. All right. He says all along, suppose, now we're talking about the psychotherapeutic process, which everything is, he says, right? Because it's all the matter of guilt in the mind. So every interaction we have with people, that's why relationships are so important in the Course in Miracles, because they will help us to see what guide we're listening to. Am I listening to the guide that tells me I'm guilty and I'm separated from the oneness? Or do I listen to the guide that remembers my connection to the oneness? All right. And in one part of the text, Jesus says you'll have what he calls, by practicing this, going to the right mind, so to speak, and saying, help me, I'm willing to see correctly. I'm willing to see the truth about this other, right? I don't want to project onto them. I'm willing to see the truth. He says you have, as you go along in your practice, on your path, as we say, all right, you have quantitative shifts. In other words, you have, many, many shifts, many aha moments, right? Many little exquisite moments with the person with whom you're in relationship. And they'll be quantitative, right? Which means there's numbers of them, until you reach that moment when you have a qualitative shift, right? It's that bigger aha moment, okay? When all of a sudden there's that, however you might experience a oneness, you might experience a feeling, a thought of no separation, right? And that awareness comes through, right? That's the process, right? And when that happens to me as a therapist, I know it's happening in the universal mind, because no one is healed alone. The one mind gets the benefit. I mean, that's why a Course can make a statement like, this world was over long ago, right? We're just living in the memory, living in the echo, right? So that's what Jesus means. You were with me when I arose, right? When I chose to see the oneness, when I chose to see the innocence and remember God, you were with me. And that means the world was over. The illusion dissolved, all right? But we're just living in the echoes of it, all right? We're choosing to live in the echo, all right? And with the practice of going to right mind, asking, being willing, right, to have my perceptions, my projections changed, being willing to see the truth, right? I work my way back because I'm afraid. That's what he's talking about, you cherishing the guilt, right? I'm afraid to let go completely, so I hold on to some of the guilt, right? That's what he means by cherishing it. And you mourn the loss of heaven, but you say, yeah, but I did it. I overcame God, right? So we fluctuate until we keep practicing and we have more of these awarenesses, the quantitative shifts, right? We become less and less and less afraid of letting go of the entire ego system. And that's the practice. And in the picture, the realm of psychotherapy, right? This is their patients can be seen. Their patients can but be seen as the bringers of forgiveness, because they present the opportunity for me to let go of my projections and have my projections corrected. In other words, to have that thought of guilt corrected. All right? I'm willing to see the innocence. All right? And that occurred because a patient came to me. All right? Now, think of it this way. You're on the bus, or whatever form of transportation there is in your area. All right? You're out in public. And even if you're sitting down on a park bench, somebody comes along and sits down next to you. They're a bringer of peace. They're a bringer of the opportunity to become aware of the oneness, to become aware of your own innocence. All right? That's probably why I wound up in New York City, because there's plenty of bringers of peace. Okay? So their patients can but be seen as the bringers of forgiveness. For it is they who come to demonstrate their sinlessness to eyes that still believe that sin is there to look upon. Right? Yet will the proof of sinlessness seen in the patient and accepted in the therapist offer the mind of both a covenant in which they meet and join and are as one. They just happen to use that religious term, the covenant. All right? But it's like a pact. Can you help me? Yes, I can. The covenant. Okay? All right? And there was another thing another point that I missed out. But the therapist can present themselves as, no matter what the patient is doing, the patient could be projecting onto you, all right? But this way, if I'm practicing what we were just talking about, being willing to see the truth about the patient, the more I'm willing to do that, the more I practice that, the more I present the image of a person whose peace can't be taken. You can't take my peace from me. I see you, I understand you, I realize what's happening, I hear you, all right? But you can't take my peace of mind, right? Because I've been going to the right mind, asking for my perceptions to be changed. Right? I saw it in action. I know I've mentioned it a couple of times with Dr. Wapnick in one of his lectures one day. People came from all around the world to Catskill Mountains in New York, Roscoe, New York. To hear his lectures at the foundation, because that's where it was in those days, in the 90s. And there was a contingent from some other state, and there was one man that just was, what a pain in the neck this guy was. I mean, I would be sitting behind him and he'd be making jokes and constantly, like a fourth grader who can't keep still. And at the break, one of the breaks, when Dr. Wapnick said, we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll see you back here in 25 minutes. And the guy comes up to Dr. Wapnick and goes, I'm really sorry. Sorry, I know I was disturbing you. I really didn't mean to, I don't mean to interrupt. And this guy was in his 60s at least, and Ken grabs him by the cheek like he's a little kid. And he goes, don't you realize you can't take my peace away from me? In other words, you can't rile me up. You can't distract me. You can't make me say you're guilty of something. He says, you can't take my peace from me. And this is what he's talking about. So as a therapist, we try to present that. We try to practice that. And we practice that by going to the right mind, and asking to be shown the truth. Show me the truth. And we can practice all day long. All right? We don't need a client. All right? And that's the process, the definition of healing. All right? Is when the we let go of the guilt in the mind. The mind is healed. There's nothing to project onto the other. And everything reflects the innocence. All righty then. Thank you for helping me study. I always say that. I like to acknowledge that I am on the path with everyone else. Right? I just happen to talk more than most. So thank you, and I will see you in the next session. Bye now.